Michael Allen, Managing Director of Beacon Global Strategies, former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush in the national security sector. Always great to see you, Michael. Thanks for joining us today at the table.
Thank you.
Of course, the situation in Israel with Gaza, now as well with Hezbollah and Lebanon, is a major story here at this United Nations Assembly. The president referring to Gaza there in that address that we heard. We've been in touch with you since October 7th, and we've seen the temperature rise consistently since then. And as Israel looks to the north now, there are questions about whether this is a war, if we can call it that, with Hezbollah, or whether this could escalate more. What do you think?
I think it's slowly and steadily escalating into something like a war. The question will be ultimately, does it turn into a ground war? But when you line up all the things that have happened in recent weeks, from the commando raid to blow up a drone factory embedded in a mountain in Syria, which Hezbollah operated, plus you take the pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks, the essentially decapitation of the Radwan force, and now more aggressive bombing across Lebanon in order to take out the very rockets and missiles that Hezbollah likes to aim at Israel. I think this is all gearing up for something much more substantial than we're seeing now.
Well, and then if that is the case, where do we cross the line to a more substantive conflict? How do we know when it's time to call it a war?
Well, it's probably, in my estimation, already very close to being a war. There's certainly trading blows left and right. But if there's a tank raid into Lebanon, I think that will be a new significant moment. They, of course, did that in 1982 and again in 2006 without great results. But if you want to be optimistic about it, this is Israel trying to create new facts on the ground so that maybe diplomacy would work, that they would implement the old United Nations Security Council resolution from 2006 and get Hezbollah pushed back northwards so that they can't range their rockets into northern Israel. Or this is just a more extreme, more aggressive version of what we hear the Israelis are up to about mowing the grass. Here, I think it's more root and branch destruction of Hezbollah, because after October 7th, I don't think they can continue to live with another genocidal terrorist organization on one of their borders.
Root and branch. All the while, the U.S. is arming up in the region, sending additional troops, we're told, with the idea, you mentioned ground war in our minds. What exactly are we prepared to do?
So we certainly would not go in on the ground, and the Israelis are proud of the fact that they don't want U.S. assistance.
They wouldn't make that ask.
They wouldn't make that ask of us. If we have more troops in the region, I think they're largely talking about gray-hulled naval ships. Maybe there's some military advisors in Israel proper to help with the command and control if there were another, like in April, attack by Iran. But by and large, I think the U.S. is trying to keep its involvement as low as possible.
F-22s we parked there, though, are for a real reason. We saw them employed in that attack from Iran.
To take out drones from Iran, cruise missiles and the rest. And also it has a big deterrent value. I mean, the real question is, what's Iran going to do next? Does Iran feel like, my God, our most prized proxy, the all-powerful Hezbollah, which we use as a deterrent against Israel attacking Iran's nuclear program, does Iran say, I can't stomach the complete degradation of this force and I have to do something? But what?
Well, I guess the question that then follows is, how much say does Iran really have in the actions of Hezbollah? If Hezbollah feels it needs to retaliate for these various attacks conducted by Israel, would they do that without the go-ahead from Tehran?
I think they're definitely in consultation. They're very, very tight. Nasrallah, who is the head of Hezbollah, is always, I'm told, very close with the supreme leader. So they're at a minimum coordinating very closely. I think Iran knows that Hezbollah's got to hit back somehow, but I think they're probably on pins and needles trying to figure out, does Iran get involved in this? How do I keep Hezbollah in the fight? How do I put pressure on Israel in another front or in another theater so that maybe they have to pull back on Lebanon?
From UNGA today in New York, NBC News reporting the Iranian president says he does not want war with Israel. You believe him?
I do. I don't think it's really in his interest because he would lose in a conventional war.
That's a mutual interest, right?
I think it is.
Yet we're still marching down this road together.
Yeah, I think that Israel doesn't want war per se. Everyone wants to take care of the nuclear program if they can, if that's even militarily possible at this point. And certainly Iran wants to continue using their proxies because they're getting the best of both worlds. They have terrorist organizations that hit Israel all the time. And while there are sanctions up against them, they're not always enforced, and they would lose a conventional exchange with Israel.
Israel has maintained that its goal here is just for Israelis to be able to return to their homes in the north. Hezbollah has said, if you want to be able to do that, just end the war in Gaza, and then the conflict between the two of us will stop. Is that not the solution here? Is there's a push still by the Biden administration to reach a ceasefire deal? Why not focus the energy and effort on that versus this action across the northern border?
So they're definitely linked. Hezbollah says we're going to keep sending rockets your way until the Gaza ceasefire occurs. But I think and we've seen reports of this that I know you've seen, that the United States has more or less given up on the prospects of a ceasefire
Certainly
in
not
Gaza.
as openly optimistic.
They're not optimistic at all, and I don't blame them whatsoever. First of all, we don't know if Sinwar's dead. He might be dead. That's what some press reports have indicated of late. They're trying to figure that out. But also, just as Gaza has slowed down because there are fewer targets, Israel feels freer to go northward.
So are we then giving up on the hostages?
I hate to say it like that, but I don't ever really think Netanyahu had it at the very top of his list. I feel like after October 7th, he felt like he needed to increase deterrence and increase the security of Israel in the region. But it looks increasingly unlikely that there is going to be a deal in the offing. But
based on what we've seen from the IDF, there would have to be a deal, right? These rescue operations have been largely unsuccessful.
They've been largely unsuccessful. There's too many miles of tunnels in Gaza. Now, listen, if Sinwar is killed, there are reports that the other people around him are not quite as hardcore as he was. So it's not inconceivable that some hostages could come out if there was some sort of deal. But let's see if Sinwar pokes his head back up sometime soon.
So obviously this is one active area of conflict that is dominating conversation at the United Nations, but it is unfortunately not the only one. The war in Ukraine is also on the agenda, and that was the focus of many of President Biden's remarks before the General Assembly today. This idea that alliances supporting Ukraine need to stick together. The Associated Press is now reporting that the U.S. on Wednesday, so tomorrow, will be announcing a new aid package, $375 million in military aid to Ukraine. But we also understand, Michael, that on Thursday, Zelensky, when he meets with Biden at the White House, is going to be pushing a plan to end the war with Russia. Do you think it's realistically time for those conversations, or is the aid going to have to keep flowing for quite some time?
Well, the aid has got to keep flowing. The Ukrainians are honestly on their back foot. For the first time, it looks like they're losing more than incremental amounts of territory. But I like this Zelensky initiative. It's because there's an election coming. It's because Donald Trump and J.D. Vance say that they are either going to, in Vance's mind, do nothing for Ukraine, or in Trump's mind, immediately try and settle the conflict. I think this is Zelensky's way of saying, I hear you, President Trump. I hear you, Vice President Harris. I understand the politics is changing in the United States. But here's what we think should be a reasonable resolution to this conflict. And I think it's fine because you can't beat something with nothing. He's got to come to something to the table.
Yeah. What is Volodymyr Zelensky's conversation with Donald Trump like? Donald Trump wouldn't even say in the debate that he wanted Ukraine to win the war.
Yeah.
To be a fly on the wall, considering the history that these two have had. What's Donald Trump's message to Zelensky?
I think Trump will say to Zelensky, we have to wrap this up soon. Yeah. If you see anything from Trump, I do believe it's a sincere belief born from stress about endless wars that he wants the fighting to stop in the Middle East and definitely in Ukraine. I think Zelensky,
you got to give up the Donbass or something.
I think Zelensky has to say, if you want a lasting peace and you want to be credited for that, I need more time and I need more military and economic assistance to condition Vladimir Putin to where he might agree to a ceasefire. If you do it along the lines as they exist today, that's trouble and a recipe for Russia to come back into Ukraine and a situation where Ukraine feels insecure.
All right, Michael Allen, always great to have you here in our Washington, D.C. studio. He, of course, is Managing Director of Beacon Global Strategies, former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush in National